Beterbiev versus Bivol. Darren, we are less than 48 hours after that fight ended. What did you think?
Well, should I tell you that I was so excited for this fight? I've been excited for it for a very long time, and I got my favourite takeaway. I got my favourite tipple. I was watching the undercard, which we'll talk about, which I was just loving life, just sat there watching these fights, especially ones like Wardley Clark and Nicholson versus Chapman, etc., thinking this is a good night of boxing with bizarre endings with Ben Whittaker and Liam Cameron giving us stuff to talk about. And then there was a bit of a break, wasn't there? And it all finished that undercard a little bit early because it was meant to be 11 p.m. UK time for the main event. And the next thing I knew, David, is I woke up on the sofa at 5 a.m. and I'd missed the fight.
No.
So the fight I had been looking forward to for years, we're not talking weeks or months, years, I didn't get to watch live because at some point I'd fallen asleep on the sofa.
Did you know the result then when you went to watch it, or did you at least get to watch it blind?
No, so I made sure I didn't. So I woke up at 5 o'clock in the morning, looked at my phone, was like, no, I couldn't believe it. So I thought, I'm not going to look on social media. I'm not going to look on BoxRec. And I just got it on my laptop, rewound the pay-per-view, and then watched it from the very start. And for a boxing purist and somebody who really appreciates the technical aspect of the sport, the technical side of the sport, it was a masterclass from both, wasn't it?
It really was. It wasn't the most entertaining fight ever, but you could see their skills, and it was incredibly enjoyable to watch. What it may have lacked in terms of highlight reel action, I think that there was plenty of drama. There were twists and turns. You could truly appreciate their craft. The good thing about the result being this close is that we get to see it again. What did you think of the decision going to Beterbiev?
So I gave it to Bivol by a couple of rounds, but it was a close fight. It was a tight fight, and if it was a draw, I wouldn't have been too fussed. Beterbiev did get the fight. He did get the decision in the end, didn't he? And I wasn't too wound up about that either. I don't think it was the robbery, which some people believe that it was. I know that Eddie Hearn has been extremely vocal, and of course he will be because Bivol's his man, and that's kind of the role that he plays, isn't it? But maybe 116, 112 was a little bit favoriting Beterbiev. That's 8 rounds to 4. What do you think about that scorecard in particular?
I don't agree with that scorecard, but if that scorecard was 115, 113 for Beterbiev, like the other judge had it, I don't know that people would be claiming robbery as much. The outcry over the result and the result itself reminded me of a quote from my favorite comedian. I don't know if you're familiar with George Carlin, but the late, great George Carlin once had a line, undisputed heavyweight champion. Well, if it's undisputed, what's all the fighting about? Here we have this fight for the undisputed light heavyweight championship. And you can say right now that Artur Beterbiev is the undisputed light heavyweight champion, but there's still dispute about it. Even if this was a close but competitive fight, I think right now we don't just have one king. We still have 2 claimants to the throne. It just happens to be that Beterbiev is sitting on the throne right now. I think that it was a close fight that could have gone either way. Dmitry Bivol absolutely elevated himself with his performance. It was one of his finest performances against a top-level opponent, up there with the Canelo fight, but in there with a true 175-pounder, somebody who was still very good at 39 years of age, in Artur Beterbiev. I thought that Bivol took the first few rounds. I was surprised that he didn't fade later on. He seemed to be tiring out at one point, and we know that Beterbiev can get stronger. But in that 9th round, that was Dmitry Bivol coming on. But there were a few things that stood out to me for why the fight ended up going in Beterbiev's direction. There were a few rounds that Dmitry Bivol started off very strong, controlled the first half of the round, the first 2 minutes. But then that second half of the round or the final minute belonged to Artur Beterbiev. And when he was landing with some clean eye-catching shots, and I think that might have stuck with the judges. But the other thing that happened is that the final 2 rounds in particular belonged to Artur Beterbiev. So when the fight truly was on the line on the scorecards, it was Beterbiev who was coming on, and those 2 rounds delivered the victory to him.
I think this fight surprised me in a way, because lots of people expected Beterbiev to catch up with Bivol at some point. You were one of them. You said it's not a case of where, it's not a case of if, it's a case of when. But what Bivol did really well is he boxed clever, pun intended, and he was very good at riding the punches, and he was very good at kind of just seeing those pockets of storms through, because there were moments when Beterbiev looked like he was getting on top of him and he was unleashing a barrage of shots, and Bivol would kind of soak them up or change the angle and make sure that they weren't being as impactful as they could be if he just stood there and let him hit him with them. But also, he did that whilst mixing it up with Beterbiev as well, which I thought was quite impressive. And he could have, for the whole 12 rounds, just been on the back foot, because he punches straight and he punches hard a lot of the time. He could have just danced around and just tried to win the fight like that. Now there was plenty of that, because that is what he is very good at. But I did really like to see that he was standing there and he was trading with him a bit, and there was some good body work, throwing a lot of hooks to the body, a lot of hooks upstairs, even the odd uppercut, which you don't see too much from Bivol. But it really was 2 fighters at the top of their game. Now, this fight, David, had a lot of eyes on it. The majority of the eyes were people like you and I, who live and breathe boxing and work in the sport. But the promotion that went into this and the money which was pumped into it was obviously there to try and catch what I would say is the average Joe, like other sports fans. How do you think other sports fans would have reacted to watching that fight? Because there wasn't 5 knockdowns and chaos galore, was there? It was just a technically fantastic bout.
I think that had the fight been more of a war, obviously it would do more for those fans. But I think it was still enjoyable enough. Going to what you were saying, Bivol boxed, but he didn't run. He engaged. It was very entertaining to watch the craft of what he does in a way that negates what Beterbiev was doing, but not in a negative way for us fans to watch. Just to draw the difference between some fighters who can negate their opponents, and it's just dreary and dreadful. I thought that Bivol's craft, the small things, were just so great to see, and his chin held up. We know that he got hurt by Joe Smith. We know that Artur Beterbiev has come on and hurt an Anthony Yard, Marcus Brown, Alexander Gvozdyk, but Bivol took those shots when they did land, and Beterbiev did land a couple of good things in there. I just was very impressed by that. As for the scoring, that's the kind of thing that when there's a narrative that boxing is corrupt, that the judging is bad, that's the kind of thing that can turn off more casual fans. And so I do get a little bit worried when the narrative becomes, oh, this was a robbery, or how could this decision have gone that way? With the caveat that I did not score this fight live, I want to say that when you have close rounds, what we call swing rounds, you should mark those down. So that if you scored on your scorecard at the end of the fight, you had it 115, 113 for Bivol, but you noticed that there were 2 close rounds that could have gone to Beterbiev, that creates an acceptable range of scores. Darren, what did you think?
So I think one of the outcomes, or the outcome which there was 2 outcomes which people didn't really see happening. One of those was Dmitry Bivol winning by stoppage, which didn't happen and didn't look like it was going to happen really at any point. And the other one that nobody really saw coming was Beterbiev winning on points, because I think most people thought if Beterbiev was going to win this fight, then he was going to win it inside the distance, and it would be 21 fights, 21 wins, 21 stoppages. So the fact that he went on and proved that he can win a fight on the cards and go the 12-round distance and look good doing so, and I know he was the fighter who had to put his foot on the gas at the end, and especially in the last 2 to 3 rounds, was impressive. But that judge, the one that scored it 116, 112, I had a look into that judge as a Polish judge. And I thought, I wonder if there's any history there. I wonder if there's anything in the past where that judge has made a bit of a boo-boo and there's a bit of a theme which goes along with that. And there isn't. He's a top judge. He was one of the judges for Nao Inui's most recent fights against TJ Doheny. He's done many, many world title fights. And I think that on BoxRec, it shows that he's been a judge for something like 2,500 bouts. So he is an extremely experienced judge. And I know this from the fortunate position which I'm in a lot of the time, is sometimes fights up close from a particular place near the ring look very different to when you watch them on TV. I don't know why. They just do. The amount of times I've been ringside watching fights and then I've gone on to Twitter to go and see what some of my friends and colleagues are saying, and they're thinking the complete opposite to me. And I'm thinking, how does that work out, or do I not know what I'm talking about? Have you experienced that as a journalist who's been a few feet away?
You know, there have been some fights where my opinion is very different from what other people see is going on. And sometimes that's a matter of what we see or don't see, and sometimes that's a matter of expectation. So going to what you're saying about this judge and you're not seeing any additional red flags, I think that we need to take note of this judge's name. And if there are more outliers in the future, then maybe we can have questions. But maybe this was just them having a different perspective, literally and figuratively. Or maybe this was a bad night at the office. But again, this didn't change the result. If it had been one round better, if it had been 115, 113, sure, there's still people who saw Dmitry Bivol winning and they'd be upset or complaining about that. But to me, I'm okay with the result. Just looking at some of the other journalists who had this fight or how they had this fight, Tris Dixon, the editor-in-chief of Boxing Scene, had it 115, 113 for Beterbiev. Adam Abramowitz of Saturday Night Boxing had it 114, 114 a draw. Cliff Rold, who we'll be talking to shortly, he had it for Bivol. That sounds about right. That's an acceptable range right there. So now we have Artur Beterbiev as the undisputed champion. We've got Dmitry Bivol still there as the clear contender. And the good news is that we could get an immediate rematch. Or, if not an immediate rematch, a rematch soon. This fight itself was financed by Turki Al Sheikh and Riyadh Season. He said afterward that he didn't agree with the score, which means that he wants to pump some more money in and get this fight again. Now, the difficult thing is when you have an undisputed champion, you've got all 4 world titles, you owe fights to your mandatory challengers. The other good news, though, is that 2 of those mandatory challengers, David Benavidez and David Morrell, are going to be fighting each other, it looks like, in January. And then another mandatory contender is Joshua Buatsi. I don't know if they want to put him in with either of these guys just yet. Are there any other fights at light heavyweight that you'd want to see, or is the rematch the thing that stands out to you most?
So normally I'm not a huge fan of immediate rematches unless there's an absolute need to. But not only is there an absolute need to in this case because it was so good and it was such a compelling fight to watch, but also I think if we wait another couple of years and they have another couple of fights in between, Beterbiev will be 41 years old. And then you'll have all these different excuses around Beterbiev as, 2 years is a lot when you get to that sort of age and you're a professional athlete. And I just want to squash all of that stuff. And I'd like to see them just get straight back to it in February, March, if that's enough time, maybe a tiny bit later, and do it all over again. What about yourself?
Yeah, I'd love to see it sooner. I know that there may be an in-between bout for Beterbiev. He hasn't been the most active in recent years. This is the first time, I think, since 2021 he's had 2 fights in 1 year. He will be turning, I think, 40 in January. So the sooner the better, especially because I don't want there to be any excuses that this fight is happening too late. Obviously, this fight could have happened a long time ago. Beterbiev is still performing at a high enough level to go the 12-round distance and win a close fight over Bivol. But the longer that this takes to get them in the ring again, the more tainted that result might be. So let's get these guys in while they're still clearly number 1 and 2. Let's move on.